Richard thought he was untouchable. He had the money, the looks, and the audacity to book the presidential suite at the city's most exclusive 5-star hotel for a weekend with his mistress. He thought his wife, Lydia, was at home, knitting and waiting for his call. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Because when the elevator doors opened on the penthouse floor, Richard didn't see a bellboy. He saw Lydia, and she wasn't checking in. She was holding the master key. This is the story of how a cheating husband walked into a romantic getaway and walked out with absolutely nothing. Let's get into it. Lydia Sterling was the kind of woman people often looked at but rarely saw. At 42, she possessed a quiet, fading sort of elegance, like a pressed flower in a heavy book. To her husband, Richard Sterling, she was furniture, expensive, well-maintained furniture that made his life comfortable but required very little actual engagement. Richard, a high-powered corporate attorney with Sterling and Associates, thrived on noise and adoration. He was 45, kept fit by a personal trainer he paid too much, and had a smile that could disarm a hostile witness or charm a waitress out of her shift. He loved the sound of his own voice, and lately he had grown to despise the silence of his wife. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, the kind of grey, biting day that makes Seattle feel like the edge of the world. Lydia sat in the sunroom of their sprawling estate in the Highlands, a cup of Earl Grey cooling in her hands. The house was magnificent, a testament to Richard's billable hours, but it was cold. "Lydia, have you seen my grey cufflinks? The ones with the mother of pearl?" Richard's voice boomed from the hallway, cutting through her thoughts. Lydia didn't shout back. She placed her cup on the saucer with a delicate clink and walked to the master bedroom. Richard was tearing through his drawers, a whirlwind of impatience. "Top drawer, left side, inside the velvet box," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. Richard paused, found them exactly where she said, and huffed. "No thank you. No eye contact. I'm going to be late. The merger with the Callaway Group is finalizing this week. I'll likely be in the city all weekend." "The Callaway Group," Lydia repeated, her voice neutral. "That's the hotel chain deal." "Yes, Lydia. The hotels. It's complicated. You wouldn't understand the nuances of the acquisition," he said, fastening the cufflinks. He checked his reflection in the mirror, turning his head to admire his jawline. "I'll be staying at the Grand Callaway downtown to oversee the transition. Don't wait for me on Friday." Lydia watched him. He was lying. She knew he was lying, not because she was suspicious by nature, but because Richard was a creature of habit, and his habit was negligence. He had forgotten that she was the one who had introduced him to the complexities of commercial real estate 15 years ago, before she retreated into the role of the dutiful wife to raise their now college-age daughter, Beatrice. "Take a coat, Richard. It's going to freeze tonight," she said. He brushed past her, smelling of sandalwood and arrogance. "I'll be fine. Buy yourself something nice while I'm gone. Redecorate the guest room or something." The front door slammed. The silence rushed back in. But today, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like the calm before a demolition. Lydia walked to the window and watched his Porsche pull out of the driveway. She waited until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Then, she pulled her phone from her cardigan pocket. It was a burner phone, a cheap Nokia she kept hidden in a hollowed-out book in the library. She dialed a number she had memorized 3 months ago. "Mr. Henderson?" she said, her voice dropping the soft, submissive tone she used with Richard. It was replaced by a steeliness that would have terrified him. "It's Lydia. Execute the final clause. I want the transfer complete by Friday morning. Yes, the entire portfolio. and make sure the staff at the Grand Calloway are briefed. I'm coming in." She hung up and looked around the room. Richard thought he was the king of his castle, venturing out to conquer the world. He didn't realize that the ground he stood on had been sold out from under him weeks ago. The Calloway deal Richard was working on was real, but he had missed a crucial detail in the paperwork. The Calloway family wasn't selling to his firm's client. They were selling to a private holding company called Nemesis LLC. And Richard, in his infinite arrogance, hadn't bothered to check who owned Nemesis. By Friday afternoon, Richard Sterling felt like a god. The week had been a blur of meetings, which mostly consisted of long lunches and dodging actual paperwork, and anticipation. The merger was supposedly in its final stages, delayed slightly by some administrative hiccups, but Richard didn't care. He had told his firm he was handling the sensitive negotiations personally. In reality, he was preparing for a weekend of debauchery. At 4:00 p.m., he picked up Clara Bennett. Clara was 24, an aspiring brand influencer who Richard had met at a charity gala 6 months prior. She was everything Lydia wasn't, loud, demanding, and visibly impressed by money. She had blonde extensions, a laugh that sounded like breaking glass, and a voracious appetite for expensive gifts. "Richard, baby, look at this," Clara squealed as she hopped into the Porsche, shoving her phone in his face. "I posted the photo of the bracelet you got me. 3,000 likes already." Richard smirked, gripping her thigh. "Wait until you see where we're staying, Clara. The Grand Calloway. Presidential suite. Top floor. View of the entire Sound." "No way." She clapped her hands. "I can do a room tour vlog. My followers will die." "Just keep me out of the frame, sweetheart," Richard said, a flicker of caution breaking through his ego. "Divorce lawyers are expensive, even for me." "Ugh, you worry too much. The old hag is probably asleep by now anyway," Clara giggled, scrolling through her feed. Richard winced slightly at old hag, not out of defense for Lydia, but because it reminded him he was married to a woman his own age. He pushed the thought away. This weekend was about him. He deserved this. He worked hard, sort of, he provided, and he needed a release. They arrived at the Grand Calloway at 5:30 p.m. The hotel was a landmark of the city. Built in the 1920s, it was an Art Deco masterpiece of gold leaf, marble floors, and velvet drapes. It smelled of old money and fresh lilies. The doorman, a man named Arthur who had worked there for 30 years, opened the car door. "Welcome to the Grand Calloway, sir," Arthur said, his face a mask of professional indifference. "Sterling," Richard barked, tossing the keys to the valet without looking at him. "Keep it close. I might need it later." He guided Clara through the revolving doors, his hand on the small of her back. The lobby was bustling. Businessmen in suits huddled in corners, tourists gaped at the crystal chandelier, and the piano player was softly hammering out a jazz standard. Richard marched up to the reception desk, Clara clinging to his arm like a decorative purse. "Checking in. Richard Sterling, Presidential Suite." He slapped his platinum card on the marble counter. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah with sharp glasses and a tight bun, looked up. She didn't smile. She stared at him for a beat longer than was comfortable. Then she looked at Clara. "One moment, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Richard tapped his foot. "Is there a problem? I booked this week ago through my secretary." "No problem, sir," Sarah said, her voice oddly devoid of the usual customer service warmth. "We just have a note on your file. Upgrades regarding the ownership transition." "Ah, yes. The acquisition." Richard nodded knowingly at Clara. "I'm practically running this place, you know. My firm is handling the legal side of the buyout." Clara cooed. "You're so powerful, Richard." Sarah looked up again, Her eyes were unreadable. Right. The buyout. Well, Mr. Sterling, it appears the presidential suite is ready for you. However, the general manager has requested to personally welcome you upon arrival to the suite. VIP protocol for the new transition. Richard puffed out his chest. Excellent. That's the kind of service I expect. Send up some champagne. Dom Perignon. Vintage. It's already being arranged, sir, Sarah said. She handed him the key cards. They were black, with a gold crest he didn't recognize. It wasn't the Callaway C, it was a stylized N. New branding? Richard asked, fingering the card. Something like that, Sarah said. Enjoy your stay. As they walked toward the elevators, Richard didn't notice the look Sarah exchanged with Arthur the doorman. Arthur gave a microscopic nod and tapped his earpiece. Target is in the elevator, Arthur whispered. Going up. Inside the elevator, Clara was already taking selfies in the mirrored walls. This lighting is amazing. Richard, kiss me for the camera. He obliged, pecking her on the cheek, careful to keep his face mostly obscured. As the numbers climbed, 10, 20, 30, Richard felt the thrill of the illicit. He was getting away with it. He was the smartest man in the room. The elevator dinged at the 40th floor, the penthouse level. The doors slid open to reveal a private foyer, lush with thick carpets and silence. This is it, baby, Richard grinned, striding toward the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. The kingdom. He swiped the black card. The light turned green. He pushed the door open. Hello, Richard, a voice said. It wasn't the general manager. Richard froze. His hand was still on the door handle. His brain short-circuited. He knew that voice. He had heard it that morning asking about cufflinks. He had heard it for 20 years. The suite was expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline. In the center of the room, sitting in a high-backed velvet armchair that looked like a throne, was Lydia. She wasn't wearing her usual beige cardigans. She was wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than Clara's entire existence, her hair blown out in a sleek, modern style. She held a crystal flute of champagne in one hand. Standing behind her were two large men in dark suits, security, and a man Richard recognized with a jolt of terror. It was Tobias Wright, the fiercest, most expensive litigator in the state, a man Richard's own firm was terrified of. Lydia, Richard choked out. The word felt like sawdust in his throat. Clara, oblivious, pushed past him. Who is this? Is this the maid? Lydia's eyes shifted to Clara. She didn't look angry. She looked amused. The maid? Lydia took a slow sip of champagne. No, dear. I'm the owner. Richard stepped into the room, his legs feeling like jelly. Lydia, what are you doing here? How did you— I'm working on the Callaway deal. You can't be here. This is sensitive client privilege. Stop, Lydia said. She didn't shout. She just dropped the word like a guillotine. She stood up. You were working on the Callaway deal, Richard, but you were too busy booking suites and buying bracelets to read the fine print of the counteroffer. She walked toward him, the heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The Callaway Group didn't sell to your client, Richard. They sold to Nemesis LLC. She stopped 3 feet away from him. I am Nemesis. The silence that followed Lydia's declaration was so absolute, it felt physical, like the air had been sucked out of the penthouse suite 40 floors above Seattle. Richard blinked. His brain was frantically trying to reboot, attempting to reconcile the two versions of his life that had just collided. In version A, he was the master of the universe, standing in a hotel suite with a beautiful mistress. In version B, his wife, the woman who collected ceramic cats and watched baking shows, was standing before him, claiming to own the building. He chose to believe version A. It was the only one where he survived. "Lydia, stop this," Richard said, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a bark. He took a step forward, regaining a shred of his courtroom bravado. "I don't know what kind of midlife crisis roleplay this is, or how you got past security, but it's embarrassing. You're embarrassing yourself." He turned to Tobias Wright, the lawyer standing like a gargoyle next to the window. "And you, Tobias? What are you doing here? Did she hire you for a divorce? Is that it? You're here to serve papers while I'm on a business trip." Tobias didn't smile. He adjusted his rimless glasses and opened a leather folder. "I am here, Mr. Sterling, as legal counsel for Nemesis Holdings, the parent company that acquired the Grand Callaway Hotel Group as of 9 a.m. this morning. I am also here to oversee the removal of unauthorized personnel from the premises." Clara, who had been busy typing on her phone, suddenly looked up. The atmosphere had finally pierced her bubble of narcissism. "Richard, what's going on? Who is the old lady?" Lydia's gaze snapped to Clara. It wasn't a look of hatred. It was the look a scientist gives a lab rat. "The old lady," Lydia said, her voice smooth as velvet, "is the reason the credit card in your purse works, Clara. Or rather, why it used to work." "Lydia, enough!" Richard shouted, his face reddening. "You don't own this hotel. I'm the lead counsel on the acquisition. My client is a consortium from Dubai." "Your client," Lydia corrected him, walking over to the minibar and casually inspecting a bottle of whiskey, "was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Sandalwood Ventures, correct?" Richard froze. "How do you know the shell name? That's privileged information." "I know it," Lydia said, turning to face him, "because I created it. I am Sandalwood Ventures. I am Nemesis. I am the client you've been billing $300 an hour to for the last 6 months, Richard. You've been working for me, and you didn't even know it." Richard's knees actually gave way. He stumbled back, catching himself on the edge of a velvet sofa. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. That's impossible," he whispered. "The due diligence, the background checks." "We're lazy," Tobias interjected. "You delegated the background checks to a junior associate because you were too busy planning this weekend with Miss Bennett. You missed the trail of ownership. It was a sloppily hidden trail, Richard. A first-year law student would have found Lydia's signature on the trust documents if they had bothered to look. You didn't?" Clara looked between them, panic rising in her chest. "Richard, what are they talking about? Did you buy the hotel or not?" "Shut up, Clara," Richard snapped. He looked at Lydia, pleading now. "Lydia, honey, okay, you're angry. I get it. I made a mistake. We can talk about this. But why the theater? Why the hostile takeover?" "This isn't a hostile takeover of the hotel, Richard," Lydia said. "The hotel was just a purchase. This," she gestured to the room. "To him, to the horrified Clara, is a hostile takeover of your life." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. She tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "That contains 3 things," Lydia listed, ticking them off on her fingers. 1. Divorce papers, citing adultery, backed by 4 months of video surveillance, bank statements, and the testimony of your driver, whom you treat like garbage, by the way. Richard stared at the envelope. 2, Lydia continued, termination papers from Sterling and Associates. "You can't fire me," Richard yelled. "I'm a senior partner. I have equity." "You had equity," Lydia corrected. "But the firm has a moral clause, Richard, and it also has a clause regarding gross negligence and conflict of interest. Representing a client, me, without realizing you were negotiating against your own wife is legal malpractice. I filed a complaint with the partners this morning. They voted you out at noon. They didn't want the embarrassment of a public trial." Richard felt like he was underwater. His career, his status, gone in an afternoon. "And the third thing?" he croaked. "The bill," Lydia said coldly. "The bill?" "For the room," she smiled. "You booked the presidential suite. It's $12,000 a night. You put it on our joint American Express, which I cancelled an hour ago. So, unless you have $12,000 in cash, or unless Miss Bennet here would like to pay for it." All eyes turned to Clara. Clara gasped, clutching her designer bag. I don't have that kind of money. Richard said he was paying." "Richard," Lydia said, "is currently indigent. He has no job, no credit cards, and thanks to the prenup he insisted on 20 years ago, the one that keeps assets separate, he has no access to my money. And since I now own the debt on this house, and his car—" Lydia pressed a button on the wall panel. The door opened, and Arthur the doorman stepped in, accompanied by 2 security guards. "Arthur," Lydia said pleasantly, "please escort these trespassers off the property. If they can't pay the bill, take their luggage as collateral." "My luggage!" Clara shrieked. "My Gucci bag is in there." "Consider it a down payment on your lesson in humility," Lydia said, turning her back on them to look out the window. "Lydia, please!" Richard begged, the reality crashing down on him. He scrambled toward her, but the security guard stepped in, blocking his path. "Where am I supposed to go? Lydia!" "I really don't care, Richard," she said to the glass reflection. "But you can't stay here. This is a 5-star establishment. We have standards." As the security guards dragged a protesting Richard and a sobbing Clara out of the suite, Lydia didn't turn around. She waited until the door clicked shut and the shouting faded down the hallway. Only then did she let out a breath. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the champagne glass down. "Are you all right, Mrs. Sterling?" Tobias asked gently. Lydia smoothed her skirt. "I'm fine, Tobias. Actually, I'm better than fine. Call the front desk, tell them the owner is checking in, and have housekeeping change the sheets. I don't want to smell his cologne." To understand the brutality of Lydia's revenge, one had to understand the silence that preceded it. It was a silence that had lasted 15 years. Lydia hadn't always been the furniture in Richard's life. When they met at Columbia University, Lydia was the star. She was a double major in economics and applied mathematics, a woman who saw patterns where others saw chaos. Richard was a charm-heavy law student who needed help passing his stats requirement. She fell for his laugh. He fell for her ability to organize his life. They married young. For the first 5 years, they were a team. Lydia worked as a risk analyst for a boutique hedge fund, making 3 times what Richard made as a junior associate. She paid off his student loans. She paid the down payment on their first house. She bought his first tailored suit. But as Richard's career began to take off, his ego grew fragile. He didn't like being the lower earner. He didn't like coming home to a wife who was tired from outsmarting the market. He made small comments. "It must be nice to stare at spreadsheets all day while I'm actually fighting for people in court. Maybe you should slow down, focus on the house. We want kids, don't we?" When Beatrice was born, Richard seized the opportunity. "It makes sense for you to stay home, Lyd. My career is on an upward trajectory. You're better at the domestic stuff anyway." It wasn't true. Lydia was a terrible cook and hated cleaning, but she loved her daughter, and she loved Richard, so she agreed. She stepped back. She became a housewife, and Richard forgot who she was. He forgot that her mind didn't just stop working because she was changing diapers. He forgot that she was a predator in the financial world. The first betrayal happened when Beatrice was 10. It was a paralegal, sloppy, obvious. Lipstick on a collar. Lydia cried for 3 days. When she confronted Richard, he gaslighted her. "You're crazy, Lydia. You've been cooped up in the house too long. You're imagining things." She stayed. For Beatrice. But something in her hardened. The second betrayal was 5 years later. A real estate agent. This time, Lydia didn't cry. She went to the bank. She took the allowance Richard gave her, which was substantial, as his guilt manifested in money, and she opened a separate, private brokerage account. She didn't use her married name. She used her maiden name, Lydia Vance, and formed a small LLC called Athena. While Richard was out at client dinners, Lydia was on her laptop in the library, trading. She didn't play it safe with index funds. She traded volatile commodities. She shorted failing tech stocks. She bought Bitcoin when it was $400 and sold it when it was $60,000. She had an uncanny ability to read market fear. She knew how people ticked. She lived with a liar, after all. By the time Beatrice went to college, Lydia had turned her allowance and savings into a portfolio worth $4 million. But it wasn't enough. Not for what she wanted to do. She didn't just want to leave Richard. She wanted to buy him out. She wanted to own the very ground he walked on. Then came the Callaway opportunity. 6 months ago, Lydia was reviewing Richard's carelessly discarded files on his desk at home. He often left confidential mergers and acquisitions data lying around, assuming she wouldn't understand it. She saw the file for the Grand Callaway Hotel Group. Richard's firm was representing a buyer who wanted to lowball the Callaway family. Richard was bragging on the phone one night about how he was going to bleed the family dry and force them to sell cheap. Lydia felt a spark of fury. Not just for herself, but for the family Richard was planning to cheat. She did her research. She found out the Callaway patriarch, Old Man Callaway, was desperate to sell because of a looming debt payment. But he hated the firm Richard represented. He wanted to sell to someone who respected the hotel's legacy. Lydia made a call. She hired Tobias Wright, a shark of a lawyer who had been pushed out of Richard's firm years ago due to office politics. Tobias hated Richard Sterling almost as much as Lydia did. "I want to buy the Callaway Group," Lydia had told Tobias over coffee in a diner 3 towns over. "With what money?" Tobias had asked, skeptical of the housewife in the beige cardigan. Lydia slid a bank statement across the table. It showed the balance of her Athena account, plus the returns from a quiet investment she had made in a biotech startup 3 years prior. Tobias looked at the number. He took off his glasses. He wiped them. He looked again. "Okay," he said. "That's substantial. But why?" "Because," Lydia said, sipping her tea, "Richard is taking his mistress there for their anniversary weekend, and I want to be the one to hand him the room key." Tobias smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Mrs. Sterling, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." From that moment on, Lydia lived a double life. By day, she was the submissive wife, nodding as Richard talked about his stressful work. By night, she was the CIO of Nemesis LLC, orchestrating a complex, leveraged buyout. She knew Richard's schedule better than he did. She knew when he was distracted. She instructed Tobias to create the shell company, Sandalwood Ventures, and approach Richard's firm as a potential client. She fed Richard busy work through his own firm, making him feel important while actually distracting him from the real buyer. Nemesis. She watched him pack his bag that Friday morning. She watched him choose his best silk ties. She watched him check his reflection, preening like a peacock. She felt nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. As she sat in the penthouse suite, waiting for the elevator to ding, She thought about the last 15 years. The insults, the neglect, the time he told her she wouldn't understand the nuances of business. She looked at the paperwork on the desk, the deed to the hotel, the majority stake in his law firm's debt, the title to his car. She understood the nuances perfectly. She checked her watch. 5:30 p.m. The elevator dinged. Lydia Sterling took a sip of champagne. It tasted like victory. The sidewalk outside the Grand Calloway was cold, wet, and humiliatingly public. Richard stood next to a concrete planter, shivering in his bespoke suit. The wind off the Puget Sound cut right through the fine Italian wool. Next to him, Clara was frantically typing on her phone, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "My Uber is 2 minutes away," she announced, her voice devoid of the cooing affection she had displayed an hour ago. "Clara, wait," Richard said, reaching for her arm. He felt a desperate need for an ally, even a shallow one. This is just a misunderstanding, a legal maneuver. Lydia is bluffing. I'll have this sorted out by Monday. We can go to the Four Seasons. I'll fix this. Clara recoiled as if he were contagious. Fix it. Richard, you don't have a credit card. You don't have a job. And honestly, you look old. What? Richard blinked, stunned. You look old, she repeated, cruelty sharpening her tone. The power made you sexy, Richard. Without it, you're just a middle-aged guy shivering on a curb who lied to me about buying a hotel. I don't date liars, and I definitely don't date broke guys. A black SUV pulled up. Clara hopped in without a backward glance. The door slammed, and she was gone, leaving Richard alone with the exhaust fumes. He checked his pockets. He had his phone, his wallet, full of useless cards, and $40 in cash. Okay, he muttered to himself. Okay. Think, Sterling. Think. He needed a base of operations. He needed to rally the troops. He dialed the number for Charles Whitmore, the managing partner at Sterling & Associates. Charles was his golf buddy, his drinking companion, the man who had helped him cover up his first affair. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this number, the automated voice droned. Blocked, Richard cursed and tried his assistant, Jessica. Sterling & Associates, Jessica speaking. Jessica, thank God, it's Richard. Listen, something insane is happening. Lydia has gone off the deep end. I need you to patch me through to Charles immediately, and then call the bank and authorize an emergency transfer. Mr. Sterling, Jessica's voice was ice cold. I have been instructed to inform you that any further contact with firm employees will be considered harassment. Security has been notified. Also, your personal effects have been boxed and are waiting at the front desk. You have 1 hour to collect them before they are donated to charity. Click. Richard stared at the phone. The screen blurred. This was a coup, a coordinated rapid-fire coup. He needed to go home. He needed to get into his safe. He had gold bars there, a stash of emergency cash, and deeds. If he could get to the house, he could regroup. He hailed a cab. Highlands, 4400 Crestview Drive, and step on it. The ride took 40 minutes. When the cab pulled up to the massive iron gates of his estate, Richard felt a surge of relief. It was still there. His castle. That'll be $65, the driver said. Richard handed him the $40. I need to run inside to get the rest. The driver, a burly man with zero patience, glared. Collateral. Give me the watch. Richard hesitated, looking at the Rolex Submariner on his wrist. It was a gift from himself to himself for winning the Peterson case. Give me the watch, or I'll call the cops, the driver said. Richard unclasped it with shaking hands. It's worth $10,000. You wait here. He scrambled out of the cab and ran to the keypad on the gate. He punched in the code, 1980, his birth year. Beep! Access denied. He tried again. Beep! He tried Lydia's birthday. Beep! Damn it! He kicked the gate. Through the bars he saw movement. The front door of the house opened. But it wasn't Lydia. It was a security guard in a uniform he didn't recognize. A private contractor. "Hey!" Richard yelled, waving his arms. "Hey! I live here! Open the gate!" The guard walked slowly down the driveway. He stopped 10 feet from the gate. He held up a clipboard. "Richard Sterling?" the guard asked. "Yes. Open this damn gate." "I have a restraining order here," the guard said, his voice bored. "Issued by Judge Calloway an hour ago. You are not to come within 500 feet of this property or Mrs. Lydia Sterling. If you do not leave immediately, I am authorized to use a taser." Judge Calloway. Richard's blood ran cold. The Calloway family. Lydia had turned them against him, too. "This is my house," Richard screamed, gripping the bars. "I paid for this driveway. I paid for that roof." Actually, the guard checked his clipboard. According to the paperwork, the mortgage was purchased by a holding company called Nemesis LLC this morning. They invoked a foreclosure clause based on, let's see, fraudulent application data. "Something about you hiding assets?" The guard smiled. "You don't live here, pal. You're trespassing." The cab driver honked. "I'm leaving. Thanks for the watch." Richard watched the cab drive away. He watched the guard turn his back and walk toward the warm, lit house. It started to rain. Richard began the long walk back toward the city. He had no car, no money, no home, and no friends. But as the cold water soaked into his shoes, a dark, twisted resolve began to form in his gut. Lydia wanted a war? She had forgotten who he was. He was Richard Sterling. He was a litigator. He destroyed people for a living. If he was going down, he was going to make sure she burned with him. Lydia sat at the head of the conference table in the boardroom of Sterling and Associates. It was Monday morning. The room was filled with the firm's partners, 7 men who had, until Friday, been Richard's closest allies. Now, they looked like schoolboys called to the principal's office. Lydia didn't look like a housewife. She wore a sharp white blazer and red lipstick. She looked like a shark in a tank of minnows. "Gentlemen," Lydia began, placing a single folder on the mahogany table. "Thank you for meeting with me. I trust you've all seen the news?" Charles Whitmore cleared his throat nervously. "Lydia, Mrs. Sterling, look, we had no idea Richard was compromised. We acted swiftly. He's gone." "He is gone," Lydia agreed, "but the rot remains." She tapped the folder. "As the new owner of the building you are currently sitting in, and the primary holder of your firm's operating debt, which I purchased from the bank on Saturday, I decided to conduct a little audit over the weekend." The partners exchanged terrified glances. "It seems Richard wasn't the only one playing loose with client funds," Lydia said softly. "I found irregularities in the chaotic escrow accounts. I found billed hours for work that was never done. I found expense reports for client development that look suspiciously like trips to Cabo." She looked directly at Charles. "Like your trip last July, Charles. The one you told your wife was a conference in D.C. Charles went pale. "Lydia, please. What do you want?" "I want total transparency," Lydia said. "And I want Richard destroyed, not just fired. I want him disbarred. I want him to be unemployed." "We can't control the Bar Association," one partner protested. "No," Lydia smiled, "but you can testify. Richard is going to sue me. He's predictable. He'll file a motion claiming I stole his assets, that I'm mentally unstable, that I used insider information. When he does, I want this firm to represent me." The room went silent. "You want us to represent you?" Against our former senior partner? Charles asked. Exactly, Lydia said. You know his playbook. You know where he hides his body. I want you to use every dirty trick he taught you against him. And if we refuse? Lydia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city she was slowly conquering. Then I called the lease on this building. You have 30 days to vacate, and I released this audit to the IRS. She turned back to them. Her eyes were hard. Do we have a deal? Charles didn't hesitate. We'll draft the engagement letter immediately. Meanwhile, Richard was in a frantic meeting of his own. He was sitting in a booth at a greasy diner on 4th Avenue, huddled over a lukewarm coffee. Across from him was Barry, a strip mall lawyer Richard used to make fun of. Barry was the only attorney in the city who would take his call, largely because Richard had promised him 40% of the settlement. It's slam dunk, Richie, Barry said, wiping grease off his chin. She can't just seize the marital assets. Community property laws. We'll file an emergency injunction. We'll freeze her assets. Do it, Richard hissed. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept in 2 days. He was staying in a hostel, sleeping on a bunk bed beneath a backpacker from Germany who snored. She thinks she's smart. She's a housewife. She doesn't know how the law works. I built that fortune. One problem, Barry said. Filing fees and the retainer. I need $5,000 up front. I told you I'm frozen. Richard slammed his fist on the table. Give me the car, Barry said. What car? She took the Porsche. No, the classic. The '67 Mustang. The one you keep in the private storage unit downtown. She doesn't know about that one, right? Richard's eyes lit up. The Mustang. His baby. He had bought it with cash 5 years ago and registered it under a fake name to hide it from the IRS. It was in a climate-controlled garage on the waterfront. She doesn't know, Richard breathed. It's off the books. It's worth $80,000. Perfect, Barry grinned. We sell it today. We get the cash. We will file the suit tomorrow. We nuke her. Richard felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't beaten yet. He had an ace in the hole. 2 hours later, Richard and Barry pulled up to the storage facility in Barry's rusted sedan. Richard jumped out, key in hand. He could already taste the comeback. He would sell the car, hire a real legal team, and drag Lydia through the mud. He hurried to Unit B42. He slid the key into the lock. It turned. He threw the roll-up door open. The garage was empty. No, not empty. In the center of the concrete floor sat a single, small object. A toy car. A Hot Wheels version of a '67 Mustang. Underneath it was a note on heavy, cream-colored stationery. Richard recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Lydia's. He walked over, his legs feeling heavy, and picked up the note. Richard, did you really think I didn't know about the storage unit? I pay the bills, remember? I found the rental agreement in your jacket pocket 3 years ago. I sold the Mustang last week to a collector in Japan. The proceeds, $85,000, have been donated to the Women's Shelter for Victims of Financial Abuse in your name. They were very grateful. They're sending you a plaque. P.S. I also cancelled your membership at the athletic club. You'll have to shower at the hostel. L. Richard crumpled the note in his fist. A primal scream tore from his throat, echoing off the empty metal walls of the storage unit. She wasn't just a step ahead. She was writing the script. Problem? Barry asked from the doorway. Richard turned, his eyes wild. She took it. She took everything. So, no money? Barry asked, his face falling. No money, Richard whispered. Then I can't help you, Richie, Barry said, backing away. Good luck with the divorce. Richard sank to the floor of the empty garage. He was trapped. But as he sat there, staring at the toy car, the despair turned into something colder, something dangerous. Lydia had stripped him of his legal weapons. She had stripped him of his money. But she had forgotten one thing. Richard knew her secrets too. Not financial ones. She was too clean for that. But emotional ones. He knew about her sister, the one she never talked about, the one in the sanitarium. If Lydia wanted to play dirty, Richard would play filthy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had one contact left, a tabloid journalist named Slimeball Steve. "Steve," Richard rasped when the man answered. "It's Sterling. I have a story for you. The secret madness of the billionaire hotel owner. How much will you pay for the medical records of Lydia Sterling's family?" Richard Sterling sat in the back of a dimly lit dive bar in Pioneer Square, the smell of stale beer and sawdust filling his nose. It was a far cry from the mahogany-panelled club rooms he was used to, but it was the only place he could afford a meeting. Across from him sat Steve the Leech Miller, a tabloid journalist known for destroying reputations for the price of a used sedan. Steve was greasy, unshaven, and looked at Richard with a mix of pity and greed. "So," Steve said, picking at a hangnail, "you say you have the smoking gun? The thing that proves the great Lydia Sterling is actually batshit crazy?" Richard nodded, his eyes feverish. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Not just crazy, Steve. Genetically compromised. Her sister Sarah has been in and out of sanitariums for 20 years. Schizophrenia. Severe paranoia. It runs in the bloodline. Lydia hides it. She presents herself as this stoic genius. But it's a facade. If we release these medical records that show a history of instability in her family, we can argue that she was mentally unfit when she executed these hostile takeovers. We can void the contracts. We can cast doubt on her sanity." He slid a manila envelope across the sticky table. It contained photocopies of private medical evaluations he had stolen from Lydia's safe years ago. Insurance against a rainy day he never thought would come. Steve opened the envelope. He whistled. "This is dirty, Sterling. Even for me. You're attacking her family?" "She stole my life, Steve," Richard hissed, slamming his hand on the table. "She left me homeless. This is war. Run the story. The Mad Queen of Seattle. Make people question if she's operating with a full deck. Once the investors get spooked, the board will panic. I can step back in as the stable hand to guide the ship." Steve grinned, a flash of yellow teeth. "I can get this on the front page of the City Chronicle by tomorrow morning, but it'll cost you 10 grand. Richard swallowed hard. He didn't have 10 grand. He had sold his cufflinks and his last designer suit to a pawn shop an hour ago for 2,000. "I'll give you 2,000 now," Richard pleaded, "and 50,000 when I get my accounts back. I swear on it, on my life." Steve considered this, weighing the envelope in his hand. The story was juicy. It was cruel. It was exactly what his readers loved. "Deal," Steve said, snatching the cash. "But we need a hook, a live interview, tomorrow at noon. I'll set up a stream on our digital channel. You break the news live. We blindside her." "Perfect," Richard breathed. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Tomorrow at noon, Lydia dies." The next morning, Richard put on his only remaining suit, a wrinkled grey number he'd retrieved from the donation pile before the security guards kicked him out. He slicked back his hair with water in a gas station bathroom. He looked gaunt, desperate, but his eyes burned with the manic energy of a man who believes he is about to win. He arrived at the makeshift studio Steve had set up in a rented loft. There were cameras, lights, and a laptop monitoring the live feed. "We're live in 5, Steve shouted, adjusting his headset. "We've got 50,000 viewers waiting. The headline, The secret sickness of Lydia Sterling is trending already. Richard sat in the chair. He practiced his somber, concerned husband's face. I'm doing this for her own good. She needs help. 3, 2, 1. Action. Good afternoon, Richard began, looking directly into the camera lens. My name is Richard Sterling. Until recently, I was a senior partner at Sterling & Associates and the husband of Lydia Sterling. I am speaking out today with a heavy heart. He paused for dramatic effect. Many of you see Lydia as a business tycoon, but you don't know the truth. You don't know the darkness that plagues her family. I have tried to protect her for years, but her recent erratic behavior, seizing assets, firing loyal employees, acting out of paranoia, has forced my hand. I have in my possession medical records that prove. Richard reached for the envelope on the desk. Suddenly, the large monitor behind him, which was displaying the live chat feed, flickered. The feed was cut out. Instead of the chat room, a video began to play. Richard turned around, confused. "Steve, what's going on? Cut the feed." "I can't," Steve yelled, frantically typing. "We're being hijacked. Someone is overriding the signal." On the screen, a crystal-clear video appeared. It was Lydia. She was sitting in her new office at the Grand Callaway, looking radiant, calm, and incredibly powerful. She wasn't speaking to an interviewer. She was speaking directly to the camera. "Hello, Richard," the pre-recorded Lydia said. Richard froze, his heart hammered against his ribs. "I knew you would eventually find your way to the gutter press," Lydia's voice echoed through the studio. "I knew you would try to use Sarah against me. You always threatened to, didn't you? Whenever you want to win an argument." "Don't be like your crazy sister, Lydia." Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. "Turn it off! Steve, turn it off!" "I'm trying," Steve screamed. On the screen, Lydia held up a piece of paper. "What Richard is about to show you are the private medical records of my sister, Sarah Vance. He stole them. He is trying to weaponize a family tragedy to cover up his own incompetence and fraud." Lydia leaned forward. The camera zoomed in on her eyes. They were cold as ice. But Richard forgot one thing. "I don't hide my family. I protect them. And this morning, at 9:08 a.m., I held a press conference. The video on the screen split. One side showed Lydia speaking. The other showed a news clip from earlier that morning that Richard, in his arrogance, had missed. The news anchor's voice filled the room. "Breaking news. Lydia Sterling, the new owner of the Callaway Group, has announced the launch of the Sarah Vance Initiative, a $20 million grant for mental health research. In a moving speech, she spoke openly about her sister's struggles and vowed to end the stigma. The move has been universally praised, causing Callaway stocks to soar." Richard watched, his mouth gaping open. She had owned the narrative before he even opened his mouth. She had turned his shameful secret into a philanthropic triumph. But the video wasn't over. "And as for you, Richard," Lydia's voice returned. "Since you like sharing private information, I thought I'd share some too." The screen changed again. This time it showed a series of text messages. Richard recognized them instantly. They were texts he had sent to his mistress, Clara, and his lawyer, Barry. Text 1. Richard to Clara. "Don't worry, babe. The old hag is clueless. I'll dump her as soon as I get the hotel deal signed. She's just a cash cow." Text 2. Richard to Barry. "If she fights the prenup, I'll leak the sister's medical file. That will shut her up. Who cares if it destroys her? I need the money." Text 3. Richard to Steve. Audio recording. "I don't care if she kills herself, Steve. Just run the story. I want her ruined." The audio recording of his voice from the bar reverberated through the studio. "I don't care if she kills herself." The silence in the studio was deafening. Richard looked at the camera. The red live light was still on. The viewer count had jumped to 200,000. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur, but he caught a few. "Monster. Disgusting. Lock him up. Team Lydia." Steve slowly took off his headset. He looked at Richard with genuine disgust. "You said she was the villain, Sterling. You didn't tell me you were blackmailing her." It's out of context," Richard stammered, backing away. "She faked it. It's AI. It's a deep fake." But then, the door to the studio burst open. It wasn't security, it was the police. 2 officers stepped in, followed by a familiar figure. Tobias Wright, Lydia's lawyer. "Richard Sterling," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. "You are under arrest for extortion, theft of private medical documents, and attempted blackmail." Richard scrambled back, hitting the wall. "No, you can't. I'm a lawyer. I know my rights." Tobias stepped forward, a thin smile playing on his lips. "Actually, Richard, you were a lawyer. The Bar Association held an emergency meeting 20 minutes ago after Mrs. Sterling sent them the evidence of your fraud. Your license has been suspended indefinitely." Tobias leaned in close, so only Richard could hear. "Lydia sends her regards. She said to tell you that the view from the top is beautiful. It's a shame you'll be seeing it from a cell." The officers grabbed Richard's arms. He struggled, screaming, "Lydia, you can't do this! I made you! I made you!" As they dragged him out of the loft, the live stream captured every second of his breakdown. The once great Richard Sterling, weeping and thrashing like a child, was hauled away into the rain. On the screen behind him, the video of Lydia faded to black, leaving only 2 words in elegant white font: "Case closed." 6 months later. The Grand Callaway Hotel was bustling. The lobby had been renovated, the heavy velvet drapes replaced with light, airy silk. The air smelled of fresh orchids. Lydia Sterling sat in the corner of the hotel restaurant, the Vance, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. She was reviewing the quarterly earnings report. Profits were up 40%. The Sarah Vance initiative had become a national model for mental health advocacy. She looked different, younger. The weight of 20 years of silence had lifted from her shoulders. "Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling." Lydia looked up. Sarah, the receptionist who had checked Richard in on that fateful day, was standing there with a smile. She was now the assistant manager. "Yes, Sarah. There's a delivery for you. It was left at the service entrance." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Sarah handed her a small, cheap envelope. It had no return address. Lydia opened it. Inside was a crumpled $5 bill and a note scrawled on a napkin. "I'm working at a car wash in Spokane. That's all I could get. They garnered my wages for the court fees. This is the first payment on the divorce settlement." "Ah." Lydia looked at the $5 bill. It was dirty and torn. She thought about the man who had once demanded Dom Perignon and treated her like a piece of furniture. She thought about the man who tried to sell her sister's secrets for 10 grand. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel pity. She felt nothing. He was just a bad investment she had finally written off. Lydia handed the $5 to Sarah. "Put this in the tip jar for the valet, would you?" Lydia said, turning back to her spreadsheet. "And if that man ever writes again, return to sender." Sarah smiled. "Understood, Mum." Lydia took a sip of her tea. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds over Seattle. It was going to be a beautiful day. And that is how Lydia Sterling turned a betrayal into an empire. Richard thought he could treat his wife like an accessory, forgetting that she was the one who built the life he enjoyed. He learned the hard way that in the game of life and business, you should never underestimate the person who knows all your passwords. Lydia didn't just get mad, she got everything. Richard is now scrubbing hubcaps in Spokane, while Lydia is running the city. It's a brutal reminder. Be careful who you step on your way up, because they might just own the building you're trying to stand on. What do you think? Did Richard deserve that public humiliation? Or did Lydia take it too far with the setup? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of supreme revenge, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama and twisted tales. See you in the next video.